Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Chaf Beis Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We're going to pick up today on the second line in the Shulchan Aruch of Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, Siman Reish Nun Gimel Sif Beis. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Hanesunim Batzara Ubashivya Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha Hamakayim Yerachem Aleihem V'Yitziim Mitzara L'Rvacha Me'afelu La'ira U'Mishiba L'Geula Hashta B'Agala U'Vizman Kariv V'Neimar Amen. Our learning should also be a schus for Shalema for David ben Balima. On the note of Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, even though this is a Dirshu Mishnah Berurah share, but still I'm speaking to an olam, and the aga b'leivish yishacheno la'acherim. When something is on your mind, you want to bring it out a little bit. I'm recording this share several days after we learned Parshas Balak. There's an interesting Rashi in Parshas Balak. Rashi tells us, the pasuk makes the point, Ve'es Bilam ben Ba'or hargu lefi charev, that Klal Yisrael killed Bilam by the sword. Rashi makes the point that we killed Bilam by the sword because Bilam tried to use our umnus against us. Bilam tried to use koil. He wanted to curse us with his koil, with his voice. And we know HaKoil Koil Yaakov. So because he tried to pick up our clay umnus and use it against us, he was killed with his clay umnus. V'hayadayim yedei Esav. The yadayim, the hand that carries the cherev, that's not our clay umnus. That's the clay umnus of the Einam Yehudim, and most notably of Esav. Even though Pashtus, he wasn't from Esav. Either he was Lavan, or maybe a son of Lavan, so he wasn't Esav. But still, our clay umnus is Koil. The clay umnus of the Einam Yehudim is cherev. We have to be very, very, very careful. We're mispal, Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, and Asunim Batzara Bashivya, and certainly, absolutely, our tefillos go out to those brave souls, the boots on the ground that are on the front in Eretz Yisrael. Every one of them, all of them, Yehudim. I don't care what stripe they are. They're all Yisraelim, Yehudim. Our tefillos go out for them, and they are in our hearts and in our minds. But we have to remember, Rabbi Yisai, that Hayodayim Yidei Esav, Koil Yaakov, the Iker Klei Mulchama that we need to use against those that stand against us, we need to use our clay umnus. Our clay umnus is HaKoil Yaakov. If ever there was a time that people have to be mechazik b'tefillah, that people have to spend more time working on their davening, pay attention to their davening, and daven, ask the Ribbono Shel Olam for help, that is our clay umnus. Our clay umnus is Koil Yaakov. Let's not fall prey to the idea that we're going to be menatzeach with the clay umnus of the Einam Yehudim, with the Yadayim Yedei Esav. There's a place for it. Unfortunately, there's a need for it. But our Iker clay umnus is HaKoil Yaakov. Okay, nachzar le'inyonenu. So here in Siman Reish Nun Gimel, we spent, I believe, 4 shiurim on Siman Reish Nun Gimel Sif Aleph, in which we have gone through the halachas of shehiyah. I'm not going to go through all of this again, but basically, shehiyah, you want to take food, you want to put it on the fire on Erev Shabbos, and you want to maintain it there, you want it to stay there on Shabbos. So we've seen Machloikis, Day Rishayna, Day Shniya. We've seen the restrictions on shehiyah, when shehiyah is mutter, when shehiyah is aser. Now turning to Sif Beis, we're going to pivot to the next topic of Siman Reish Nun Gimel, which is the question of Chazara. What's Chazara? Well, literally, the word Chazara means to return. When we chazer our Dirshu Daf Yomi, we're returning over the material. So Chazara means to return. What's the question of Chazara on Shabbos? Somebody had a pot of food on the fire on Shabbos, and now he removed it from the fire. Now he wants to put it back on the fire. So maybe somebody took the cholent off, he served out cholent, now they want to put the cholent back on the fire so some people could have hot cholent by Shalosh Udas. This is the shaila of Chazara. returning food to the fire after it was removed from the fire. Now, let's stop for a minute before we go see the Mechaber, and let's analyze. Let's take a look at the question of Chazara, and let's take a look. What do we think about this Shaila of Chazara? Well, first of all, what kind of food are we talking about? We certainly can't be talking about food that's not mavushal. If it's food that still has bishul left to it, if it's not food that's mavushal called sarchai, so then by putting it onto the fire, you're committing bishul. You're doing an act of bishul. Nobody is going to be matir taking food that's not fully cooked, putting it on the fire on Shabbos. That would be bishul 101. Of course that would be awesome. So we're not talking about food that's not fully cooked. We're talking about food that is fully cooked. Okay? Now, if we're talking about food that's fully cooked, so let's take a look at this. What exactly is wrong with taking food that's fully cooked and putting it on a fire on Shabbos? As a matter of fact, forget the question of Chazara. Why can't I go to my refrigerator, take out fully cooked food, and put it on the fire on Shabbos? Now, let's analyze that. If the food in question is a davar lach, let's say it's a pot of soup, liquid, a davar lach, that you wouldn't be allowed to do. We'll see in Siman Shin Yud Ches that when you have cold davar lach and you want to reheat it, that constitutes bishul. But let's say it's a davar yavesh. We have a dry cooked food. It's mavushal called sarchai, and you want to put it on the fire on Shabbos. It's not bishul. If it's fully cooked, it's not bishul. So why is that a problem? Certainly, if it was on the fire on Shabbos and it's hot, why can't I put it back on the fire? What's the problem with putting it back on the fire? So to understand this, you have to understand that we're dealing with a derabanan. We're dealing with an Isser derabanan of Chazara, the same way we were dealing with an Isser derabanan of Shehiyah. Why didn't Chazal want you to do Chazara? So the Rishonim talk about this, and the Rishonim basically talk about two different problems. One problem is, when you take food that was not on the fire on Shabbos, or it was removed from the fire on Shabbos, but for sure, if you have food that wasn't on the fire at all on Shabbos, and you go to put it on the fire, it's mechzi kimavushal. It looks like you're in the kitchen and you're cooking. That's what it looks like. You're taking a pot of food and you're initially putting it on the fire. It wasn't on the fire. It was off the fire. You're now going and taking it, putting it on the fire. It looks and feels like bishul. And you know what they say? If it looks like bishul and it smells like bishul and it tastes like bishul, it probably is bishul. What do I mean? It's not bishul. It's mavushal kol tzarcha. It's not bishul. But if we allow you to do something that is so similar to bishul that it's a mechzi kimavushal, that creates a problem. One of the problems it creates is if people are going to be used to doing that, if they're going to be used to putting food on the fire on Shabbos, then they might actually go make scrambled eggs on Shabbos. They might really do bishul on Shabbos. So that's one problem. It's a problem of mechzi kimavoshel. And the Mishnah Berurah alluded to this. We already had this in the Mishnah Berurah on Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, in Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Lamed Zayin. At the end of Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Lamed Zayin, he mentioned that by Chazara, there could be a problem of mechzi kimavoshel, because you have a pot that was removed from the fire, and now you want to go put a pot that wasn't on the fire, it's off the fire, and you want to put it on the fire. That's mechzi kimavoshel, and he's taking this from a Rashi. Rashi says this in Masechta Shabbos, that the potential problem of Chazara is mechzi kimavoshel. Tosfos, Ramenu Tam, they bring down that a problem with Chazara is the same problem that we had by Shehiyah. The problem is, if you're taking a pot that was off the fire and you're putting it back on the fire, why are you putting it back on the fire? You're putting it back on the fire because you want to reheat it. If you want to reheat something, maybe you'll stoke up the coals. So that's another problem that we could have by Chazar. Now, like we said, Chazal never allowed you, they were never matir, taking a pot that was not on the fire on Shabbos at all and putting it back. And putting it on the fire on Shabbos, That they're never matir. But they were matir chazara. If the pot was on the fire on Shabbos and it was removed and you want to put it back, they were matir chazara under certain conditions. What's the point of those conditions? The point of the conditions is to remove the issue of mechzi kimavushal, to remove the issue of shemi yechata b'gechalim. So, for example, if you have a kira that's grufa uketuma, if you have a kira that's swept out of coals or the coals were banked, we've removed both problems. We've removed the problem of shemi yechata b'gechalim the same way as we said by shehiyah. If it's grufa, if you shoveled out all the coals, you can't be mechata b'gechalim. If it's ketuma, you did a maisa to lessen the heat of the coals, we're not afraid that you're going to be mechata b'gechalim. So we took care of the risk of shemi yechata b'gechalim. We also took care of the risk of mechzi kimavushal. Why? Because it doesn't look like bishul when you take a pot and you put it on a kira that's grufa uketuma. That's not the way people cook. When somebody wants to cook, he fires up the kira. He puts in hot coals. He stokes them up. Then he goes to cook. So when somebody takes a pot and puts it on a kira, on Shabbos, that's grufa uketuma, it's not mechzi kimavushal. Will we allow you to put it on if it wasn't on the kira on Shabbos at all? No. But if it was on the kira on Shabbos, you took it off and you're putting it back, if it's grufa uketuma, it's not mechzi kimavushal. That's one of the conditions. But grufa uketuma alone is not going to do it. We're going to see other conditions. For example, we're going to see that you have to when you took the pot off, you have to be holding the pot, and you have to hold the pot until you put it back. Why? What does that take care of? Well, if you took the pot off the kira on Shabbos, and you made sure to hold the pot until you put it back, then when you put it back, we see it as a continuation of the first time you put the pot on the fire before Shabbos. We don't look at it anymore as if you're initially putting a pot on the fire on Shabbos. No, it was on, you took it off for a moment and you're putting it back. That's not mechzi kimavushal. It's only mechzi kimavushal when you're initially putting the pot on the fire on Shabbos, the same way you do when you cook. When you cook, you're not taking something that was off the fire and putting it back. You take your carrots, you take your potatoes, you take your onions, you take your celery, you take your chicken, you put it in the pot with water, and you initially put it on the fire. That's the way you cook. If on Shabbos you're not initially putting it on the fire, it was on the fire, you took it off for a moment to put it back, that's not mechzi kimavushal. So this is the question of chazara. Chazal were matir you, they're never matir you, to put a pot initially on the fire on Shabbos, even if it's mavushal called tzarchai, so there's no bishul over here. But that you can't do. That's mechzi kimavushal. You're never allowed to do that. But chazara, if it was on the fire on Shabbos, you took it off and you're putting it back, then under certain conditions it's mutter if we take care of Chazal's concerns. If we take care of shemi yechata b'gechalim, we take care of mechzi kimavushal. Okay, against that backdrop, let's take a look here. Chav Beis Amud Aleph, second line down, Siman Reish Nun Gimel, Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber. Kira, so we're talking again about a kira. Remember, the Mechaber told us a kira is a relatively large structure. It's that inverted pot sitting on the ground. The fuel is in the inside, and up on top, there's room to put two pots. So that's a kira. Kira shehi grufa uketuma. If you have a kira that's grufa uketuma, you swept out the coals, or you left the coals in, but you banked them with ash, so you did something to lessen the heat. So kira shehi grufa uketuma. V'notal hakidera me'aleha. And you removed the pot. You had a pot on this kira. Remember, shehiyah, the Mechaber said, shehiyah, on a kira that's grufa uketuma, right? That's mutter. According to the Day Rishayna, it's mutter as long as it's mavushal called tzarchai. It's mitztamik viraloi. According to the Day Shnia is even more makel. So you have this kirishi grufa ktuma v'natal akdera me'alel. You took the pot off. Afilu b'Shabbos mutter lahachzira. On Shabbos, you're allowed to put the pot back on the fire under the following conditions. So condition number one, the Mechaber just laid out, is that the kira has to be grufa uktuma. Let's jump right away into the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cutting on base. The Mishnah Berurah says condition number one for Chazara is shehi grufa uktuma. We have to be talking about a kira that's grufa uktuma. Aval eino garfa katum. But if the kira is not grufa uktuma, aser afilu b'mitztamik v'raloi. Chazara would be aser. It would be aser to return the pot to the kira, even if the food is mavushal called sarchai, and it's mitztamik v'raloi. So that continued cooking would be detrimental to the quality of the food. V'chein, and similarly b'tanor, if you're not dealing with a kira, if you're dealing with a tanor, that's the tanor that's angled, its point narrow at the top, so it builds up intense heat, then afilu garfikotum. A tanor, even if it's garfikotum, chazar is going to be aser. Because remember what we said, a tanor, because of its intense heat, even if it's grufa uktuma, it has the same din as a kira that's not grufa uktuma. So the Mishnah Berurah says, condition number one of the mechaber is that in order for chazara to be mutter, the kira has to be grufa uktuma. But if it's not grufa uktuma, then chazara is always going to be aser. Why is it going to be aser? There's no chash of shemi yachata b'gecholim. There's no coals, or you bank the coals, so we're not worried you're going to be mechata b'gecholim. But the reason chazara is aser is because it's mechsi kimevushal. To go ahead and take a pot and put it back on the kira, on a kira that's not grufa uktuma, that looks too much like bishul. It looks and feels too much like bishul, and if we allow you to do that on Shabbos, you might come to actual bishul on Shabbos. Now, Oiskot Nun Gimel, the Mishnah Berurah points out, the Mechaber made a point of saying that if it's grufa uketuma, and we're going to have the coming conditions that you also must meet, but under those conditions, chazar is mutter afilu b'Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what's this afilu b'Shabbos? Why did the Mechaber have to make that point? Explains the Mishnah Berurah. Deloi tema deloi yitiru chachamim el kishenatal me erev Shabbos umachzir be'erev Shabbos samach lechashecha. We know from the Gemara in Shabbos that Chazal were matir chazara under certain circumstances. Now somebody might have come along and said, wait a second. When the Chazal were matir chazara, how do we know that they were matir chazara on Shabbos? Maybe when they were matir chazara, what they were saying was, if you took a pot off the fire on Erev Shabbos in the afternoon, and now you want to put it back onto the fire right before Shabbos, maybe that's what Chazal were matir. We know that Chazal put restrictions on what you could do on Erev Shabbos. We learned that by Shehiyah. Shehiyah, the Maisa that you're doing is only on Erev Shabbos. So maybe when Chazal were matir chazara, they were only matir chazara on Erev Shabbos. How do you know they were matir chazara on Shabbos? That's why the Mechaber stresses over here that the chazara is going to be mutter afilu b'Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Deloi tema deloi yitir chachamim el kishenot on Erev Shabbos umachzir be'erev Shabbos samach lechashecha. Don't think that the heter of Chazal was only to return the pot to the fire if you took it off early in the day on Erev Shabbos and now you're putting it back samach lechashecha. Kamash malon de mutter lita l'lahachzir afilu b'Shabbos gufei. What the Mechaber is telling you is that under the right conditions, you could do chazara on Shabbos itself. You could take the pot off the fire and put it back on the fire on Shabbos itself. Va'afilu kama pamim. You could do this as many times as you want under the right circumstances. Now let's go back to the Shulchan Aruch. So what was condition number one? Condition number one is that it's a kira shehi grufa uktuma. It has to be a kira that's either grufa or ketuma. Either you have to have swept it out of coals, or you have to have banked the coals. Then the Mechaber said, afilu b'Shabbos mutter lahachazira. You could do chazara even on Shabbos. Now, I'm going to pause here for another second and take a look at the Biur Halacha. Biur Halacha dibra masel mutter lahachazira makes a very important point. Remember that we're dealing here with food that's mavushal kol tzarchai. If it's not mavushal kol tzarchai, then putting it on the fire at Shabbos would be an act of bishul. But the Bir Halacha makes a very important point. Hainu afilu mitztamik v'yofeloi. When we're being matir chazara, we're going to be matir chazara if it's mavushal kol tzarchai, but it's mitztamik v'yofeloi. Even though the continued cooking on Shabbos is going to be beneficial, the cholent is going to dry out more and you like a drier cholent, so it's mitztamik v'yofeloi. But chazara under the right conditions is mutter even by mitztamik v'yofeloi, because mitztamik v'yofeloi is not bishul. It's mavushal kol tzarchai. It's not bishul. The problem of mitztamik v'yofeloi is only a problem when we're worried about shema yechata b'gecholim. That's when mitztamik v'yofeloi is a problem. You want to accelerate the cooking because it's mitztamik v'yofeloi. But here, the first thing that we're dealing with is a kirishi gruf uktuma. So right away, we're requiring grufu ktuma. So says the Bir Halacha, mitztamik v'yofeloi, chazara is mutter under the right conditions. So that was condition number 1. Now let's go to condition number 2. Says the Mechaber, second line down near the end of the line, right by the ois cut nun daled for the Mishnah Berurah. Kol zman shehi roisachas. Another requirement over here is that the pot still has to be hot. The pot of food still has to be hot. What does hot mean? It has to be yatzer ledis. It has to be that your hand would jump back, if you would go touch the food. 104, 105 to 120, depending on the paiskim, somewhere around there. But the food has to still be yatzer ledis. If the food is no longer yatzer ledis, then, especially if we're dealing with a davar lach, if we're dealing with something with liquid, now reheating it would already constitute bishul. So we're not going to be matir you to do chazara if the food already cooled down. That's the sheet of the Mechaber. So the Mechaber is telling you condition number 2. We'll see in the Mishnah Berurah, this is the Mechaber talking. The Mechaber says condition number 2 is that the pot still has to be hot. Now we come to condition number 3, which is an interjection by the Ramah. And this is famous. Everybody who does chazara on Shabbos is familiar with this halacha. Says the Ramah, Haga, v'oida biyadoi. The the pot still has to be in your hand. So you want to do chazara. You had a pot, you had the cholent, it was on the fire on Shabbos, you took it off. Now you want to put it back. Says the Ramah, in order to put it back, it has to be that you never let go. You took it off, and you were still holding it. Now, what's the point of this? I mentioned it in the Hakdama, but let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, well, first we have to see Mishnah Berurah's cut nun daled. The Mechaber's next requirement over here was, Kol zman shehi roisachas. The food has to still be hot. Mishnah Berurah makes an important point. Says the Mishnah Berurah, prat zeh, this detail, this requirement, that the food still has to be hot, eina doima l'chal haniskarim b'siv zeh. This requirement is different than all of the other requirements that we're going to see. Dibahem, by all of the other requirements, that it has to be grufu ktuma, that, like the Ramah just said, it has to be oida biyadoi, you have to still be holding on to the pot. Dibahem, hatamahu, the rationale for all those requirements is, Delohitiru chachamim chazara ki im ba'ofen zeh. The Chazal said that in order to do chazara, you have to fulfill all of those tanoim. Why do you have to fulfill those tanoim? Because those tanoim all take care of the problem of mechzi kimavushal. Oida biyadai takes care of mechzi kimavushal. Again, like I mentioned earlier, if you're putting a pot back on that you've been holding the whole time, that doesn't look like you're initially putting a pot on the fire on Shabbos. So it's not mechzi kimavushal. You need grufu ktuma, because if it's grufu ktuma, it's not mechzi kimavushal. It doesn't look like you're doing cooking. Nobody does cooking initially on a kira that's grufu ktuma. So that's the rationale for all of the other requirements. These are requirements that Chazal made to take care of their concerns, of their chshashas. Aval bazeh. But when it comes to this requirement of the Mechaber, that the food still has to be hot, aval bazeh tamhu, over here the rationale is much different. Over here, the kevan shenistalik mirisichasai, if the food wouldn't be hot anymore, the hainu she'ena yad seledes boy, it's no longer the temperature of yad seledes, it already cooled down more than that, yeh boy shuvis or bishul. Now you're dealing with an Isser Bishul. If the food cooled down, especially by a Davar Lach, if the food cooled down and now you're reheating it, now you're dealing with actual Bishul. So the reason why the food still has to be hot is not to take care of the chshoshes, of the concerns of Chazal. No, it's in order to make sure that you're not actually performing Bishul. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, but that's according to the sheet of the Mechaber. That is a bishul shaila here. But according to the psak of the Ramah that we'll see Be'ezus Hashem Yisparach when we get up to Siman Shin Yud Ches, Nagu lahakel loy nitztanen legamri. The Ramah is not worried about the bishul question unless the food is nitztanen legamri. It mamish cooled off so that you're not going to eat it anymore because it's not considered hot food anymore. Forget Yad Seledes. The Mechaber is machmir. The Mechaber says once the food is no longer Yad Seledes, you have a bishul shaila. The Ramah says, not so fast. If it's not nitztanen legamri, you don't have a bishul shaila. Okay, now let's go to Ois Katan Nun Hey. So the Ramah interjected here, and he said another requirement. Another requirement is that the food, the pot, has to still be in your hand. You took it off, and you didn't let go. You were holding it, and now you put it back on. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ritzonai Loymar. What the Ramah wants to say with these words is, Shaloi Heser Hakdera Miyadai, you didn't take the Kdera, you didn't take the pot out of your hand, May Eis Nitilasa Min Akira, from the time that you took it off the Kira, Ad Shasha Yachsirena, until the time that you put it back. And what's the Ramah's point? What's the Ramah's point when he says that you have to have not let it out of your hand? Explains the Mishnah Berurah. Ula afuke, what the Ramah is coming to tell you, he's contrasting to im hinicha al gabe mita oisafsil v'chadoyma lozeh beintayim. What he's coming to tell you is the Ramah's requiring that you never let go of the pot. Now let's think about this for a minute. Normally, when they were dealing with a kira, the kira was sitting on the ground. When somebody took a pot off the kira because he was finished with it, the cooking was finished, he took it off the kira and he put it on the karka. He put it on the ground. So when you put the pot on the karka, your cooking is finished. If you would go now and pick up that pot off the karka and put it back on the kira, it would look like a new act of bishul. That would be 100% merci kibavushal. Why? Because the fact that it was on the fire before, in the words of the Paiskim, Batla Shehia Rishona. If you take it off, we want, in order to be Matir Chazara, we want that when you put the pot back on the fire, it should look like a continuation of the original bishul. You're not doing a new bishul on Shabbos. It's not Merci Kamavushal. The bishul was original before Shabbos. You did shehiyah. It was cooked before Shabbos. It was staying on the fire. Now you're just taking it off for a moment and putting it back on. That's not a new act of bishul. But if you take the pot off and you put it on the ground, now the original act of bishul, the shehiyah rishona, is over. Now when you put it back on, it looks like a new act of bishul. That's what we have to take away from in order to be matir chazara. And I'll give you a little heads up to understand what's going to come next in the Mechaber. The Mechaber holds that if you would take the pot off the kira, and instead of putting it on the karka, instead of putting it on the ground, you would put it on a safsel, you would put it on a chair, then you let go, you're still allowed to put it back on. Why? Because by putting it on a chair, it's not batla shehiyah rishona. You didn't end the first act of bishul by putting it on a chair. That's not the way it's done. When it's finished, you put it on the karka. You don't put it on a chair. The fact that you put it on the chair and you didn't put it on the karka shows that the original bishul is not finished. So the Mechaber holds that you can take it off the chair and put it back on the fire. The Ramah disagrees. The Ramah holds, I don't care where you put it. I don't care if you put it on the karka. I don't care if you put it on a chair. I don't care if you put it on a bed. If you let go of the pot, it's batla shehiyah rishona. And now if you put it back, you're doing a new initial act of bishul, it's merci k'mavoshel. So it explains the Mishnah Berurah. That's what the Ramah means over here when he interjects and he says, va'oida biyadoi. In order to be matir chazara, it has to be that you never let go of the pot. Once you let go of the pot, I don't care where you put it, all bets are off. Says the Mishnah Berurah inside. You didn't let the pot out of your hand. May ace the tilosam and akira from the time you took it off the kira ad shal until you returned it to the kira. Ula afuke, and this stands in contrast to if you put it down on a bed or you put it down on a bench or a chair, that would be a problem according to the Ramah. Heavy according to the Ramah, that's akin to you putting it on the karka. And it would be batla shir rishona. V'zeh aser l'kuliyama the batla shir rishona, and that would be aser because batla shir rishona. Now, when you want to put it back on the kira, it's not a continuation of the original bishul. It's a new act of bishul, and it's mechzik mavoshel, and that would be aser. V'shuv kishamachzer. Now, when you want to do chazara, or manicha al gabi akira, and you want to put it back on the kira, hevelei kemoshev lechatchila al gabi akira b'Shabbos. We would look at it as if you're initially putting the pot on the fire on Shabbos. V'chachamim lo hitiru el chazara. The Chazal will never matir initially putting a pot on the fire on Shabbos, even with food that's mavushal called tzarchai. Av shekfar nisbashla called tzarchai ve'eid ba min adin mishum isabishal. Even though it's mavushal called tzarchai and there's no bishul involved. To be matir, to put a pot initially on the fire on Shabbos, take something out of the fridge and put it on the pot on the fire on Shabbos, even if it's mavushal called tzarchai, Chazal would never matir that. And it doesn't matter that even if it didn't come from the fridge, even if it's not cold, Chazal would never matir to initially put a pot on the fire on Shabbos, because that 100% would be messy k'mavushal. They're only matir chazara. And in order for it to be called chazara, it has to be that you're putting it back on. It's not an initial placement on the fire. It's a continuation of the fact that it was on the fire previously. And the Ramah is machmir over the mechaber. The Ramah holds that in order for it to be considered a continuation, it has to be that you never let the pot out of your hand. The mechaber is more makel. The mechaber says, you put it down on a chair and you let go, putting it back is still considered a continuation. It's only not considered a continuation if you put it on the ground. If you put it on the ground, if you put it on the karka, you break the connection to the original shehiyah. But if you put it on the chair, you don't break the connection. But the Ramah is machmer. Mikamokim kevin shemamida b'mokim shederech levashel shem tamid nirek mevashel lechatchila b'Shabbos. So that's the next requirement over here. So we had so far the kira has to be grufo ktuma. We had that the food has to still be hot. Now we had the Ramah that says that it has to still be in your hand. You have to have never let go of it. Now let's go back to the mechaber. The mechaber says v'lo hinicha al gabe karka. So you see what's going on here? Here you see the machlokes, the mechaber and the Ramah. The mechaber is only makpid that you didn't put it on the ground. But if you put it on a chair, if you put it on a bed, even though you let go, it's still okay. The Ramah was chaylik. The Ramah said it has to be oida biyadoi. Now let's go weiter in the Ramah, Haga, where the Ramah adds another requirement that again, I think everybody's familiar with. And that is v'daitoi lahachazira. It has to be that when you took the food off, you had in mind that you're going to put it back. Why? Because again, that makes the chazara a continuation of the original shehiyah. When you took it off, you weren't taking it off. You weren't ending the original shehiyah. No, you always had in mind that you're taking it off and putting it back on. So you understand that you're not allowed to initially put a pot on the fire on Shabbos. You understand that you're only doing chazara. And that's what the chazal were matir. They were matir chazara. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting involved. V'daitoi lachzira hatam gam kein kanal. The rationale for this is the same that we've seen until now. Shal yedei zeh loy botla adayin shehiyah harishona. Because as long as you had in mind when you took it off that you're taking it off to put it back on, the shehiyah rishona is not bottle. Adayin loy botla adayin shehiyah rishona shehisha ois ala kira b'ba'id yoyim. The shehiyah rishona that you put the pot on the fire on Erev Shabbos, it's not over now. Because when you took it off, you had in mind to put it back. Because you had in mind to put it back on before it gets cold. Aval, and this is a very important halacha, Rabbi Isai. We'll see the chumrah and we'll see the kula. Aval in betchila kishinitala loy haya daita lozeh. But what if when you took the cholent off the fire, you didn't have in mind to put it back? It was time to serve the cholent. You went to the blech, you took the pot off the blech, and you didn't have in mind that you're putting it back. Then after you took it off, your wife calls to you and she says, oh, there are some people who want to still have cholent by shalosh shudas. Put it back after you took it off. But when you took it off, you didn't have in mind to put it back. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Aval b'tchila kishenat loy haya daita lozeh, v'shuv nimlach lahachzer tekef, and then you changed your mind and you decided that you want to put it right back. Aser, then you're not allowed to put it back, says the Mishnah Berurah. Af shelo yiniach al gabi karka beintayim, even though you didn't put it down. I guess even though you don't let go, says the Mishnah Berurah, really, you're not allowed to put it back. Because the Ramah says it has to be daitay lachzira. You weren't daitay lachzira. You took it off not having in mind that you're going to put it back. Because now that you didn't have in mind to put it back, so when you put it back, it's considered an initial placement. It's not considered a continuation of the original placement. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'ayin b'bir halacha, but take a look at the bir halacha, she'ivenu harbe me rishonim, where we bring down many rishonim, shemekilin ba'oidan b'yadai, they're mekel, as long as you never let go, afilu ein daita lahachzer. You took it off, you took the cholent off, and you didn't have in mind that you're going to put it back, but you never let go. Then your wife said, make sure you put it back. A lot of Rishonim are mekel and say you could put it back. V'chein makilin, there are Rishonim that are also mekel, the other way. B'daitoi lahachzira, you had in mind to put it back. Af shebeitayne sirin miyadoi. Your wife said, remember, when you take the cholent off the blech, have in mind to put it back, because people want to have cholent by shalosh shudas. And you said, okay, no problem. You took it off, having in mind to put it back, and then it got heavy, and you forgot that you put it down. Many Rishonim say that you could be mekel. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "V'nireh be'eis hatzorich yesh lismoich al zeh." The Mishnah Berurah says that if you have a tzorich, you could be mekel. So again, what are we saying over here? We're saying that there are requirements that you need for chazara. You need grufa uktuma. So let's put this into a contemporary kitchen. First of all, the food has to be mevushal kol tzarchai. So you have the cholent is on the blech. It's definitely mevushal kol tzarchai. It might be mitztamik v'yafaloi, but the bir halacha said chazar is mutter mitztamik v'yafaloi. So okay, so you have a pot of cholent, it's mevushal kol tzarchai, it's on a blech, so you have grufa ketuma. A blech is ketuma. The blech has the same din as ketuma. It's as if you banked the coals. You put something over the fire that lessens the heat of the fire, and it covers the fire. So that's considered ketuma, right? So you have mevushal kol tzarchai, you have ketuma. Then you need oidar roisachas. It has to still be hot. So you just took the cholent off, it's still hot. You need oidar biyadoi. You have to still be holding on to the pot. You need daitoi lahachzira. It has to be that when you took it off, you had in mind to put it back. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, what if you're missing one of those two last ones? What if it wasn't daitoi lahachzira? When you took it off, you didn't have in mind to put it back, but you're still holding it. Or, what if when you took it off, you had in mind to put it back, but then you forgot it, you put it down, and you let go? Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you have a tzorich, you could be mekel. As long as you have one of those two mitigating factors, as long as you either had daitoi lahachzira, that you had in mind to put it back, or you have oidar biyadoi, if you have a tzorich, you could be mekel. I was talking to a paisik this morning. I asked him, what does that mean you have a tzorich? Is it like a shasat chak? There's nothing to eat? He said, no, it doesn't say shasat chak. It says a tzorich. You know what a tzorich is? Somebody wants to have hot cholent by shalosh shudas. That's called a tzorich. No tzorich means that you're doing it for nothing. I don't know why. I don't know. I might as well put it back on. That's not a tzorich. But if your son tells you, Daddy, I want to have hot cholent by shalosh shudas, that's a tzorich. You have a tzorich, then as long as you have one of these two mitigating factors, you can still put it back on. Okay, now we go weiter. 2 lines from the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch, right by the Ois Katan Nun Zayin for the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mechaber, V'dafka al gaba. When you want to do this chazara, you're only allowed to put it on top of the kira. Aval l'soicha aser. But to put it down inside in the bottom of the kira where the fuel goes, that you're not allowed to do chazara. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what's at work over here? Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting on Zayin. Vedafka al gaba, you're only allowed to do chazara to the top of the kira. What does that mean, the top of the kira? So let's remember what this kira is. It's that inverted pot. The fuel goes inside. The pots go on top. From what the Mishnah Berurah is going to say right now, it seems that the standard way these kiras were made were that there were two openings on the top surface of the kira. That's where you generally put your pots, over those openings. The Mechaber says Chazara is only mutter al gaba, only on the top surface of the kira, not down in the bottom where the fuel goes. The Mishnah Berurah is going to say like this. When we say al gaba, what does that mean? So, really, to put a pot over the opening was a problem. Why? Because the pot would fall inside. How did you put a pot on the opening? So there was a cover. There was something that you put down. There was a platform that you put to cover the opening, and you put the pot over the opening. Mishnah Berurah is going to say, you know what al gaba means? Al gaba means on top, either next to one of the openings, where you have a surface that you could rest the pot on, or you put the cover on, and you put it on the cover. That's what al gaba means. Toicha means down inside where the fuel goes. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting on Zayin. V'dafka al gaba. What does al gaba mean? Hainu al oivi daf noiseha milamala. It means on the thickness of the wall of the kira up on top. In other words, on the side next to where the opening is, where you have a surface that you could rest a pot on. Or shesam kisoy al chalola. Or you put a cover on the opening, and you rested the pot on the opening. Vehemed akter al kisoy. You put the pot on that cover. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, how about this? How about if you didn't put a cover on the opening, and you lowered the pot into the opening, and maybe you hung it from something, or you had something underneath that could support it. So now the pot is inside the bottom of the kira. You lowered it into the opening, but it's not sitting on the floor of the kira, and part of the ketera, part of the pot, is sticking out above the surface. Says the Mishnah Berurah, even if you lowered the pot down into the airspace of the bottom of the kira, but a little bit of the walls of the kira are protruding up above the top. Apparently, they had pots that were made for this. There were pots that could not rest on a surface. They had a narrow bottom and a wide top, and they were made to be suspended in the kira. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Gam kein bechlal al gaba heavy. That would be considered al gaba, and chazara would be mutter. V'loy mikri toicha, when the Mechaber says that you could put it on top, but you can't put it inside, what's called toicha, that's aser. What's called putting it inside, with chazara is aser. Elikish yesheves hakdera al karkas akira. That's only if the pot is actually sitting on the floor of the kira, on the bottom. That's what's called toicha, that the Mechaber says is aser. Ois kat nun ches, aval toicha aser. You're allowed to do chazara to the top of the kira, but you're not allowed to do chazara to the inside of the kira. Why not? What's the problem of doing chazara to the inside of the kira? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Tekevan shehu maimed l'soicha, when you put it inside, kederech shemevashlin ba tadir, apparently, when you used a kira, the way initial bishul was done, when you wanted to first make your chicken soup, you didn't put it on top. You put it inside. Maybe that's where you put it in to boil up and to first get cooked. Then you lowered the flame, so to speak. You took it out of the toicha and you put it al gaba. But putting it toicha, that's mechsi kimavushal. That looks like initial bishul. And that's what we have to get away from. We can't allow you to do chazara on Shabbos if it looks like initial bishul. I love the way that sounds, initial bishul. That we can't have. We could only have chazara. Nirakim avashal. Brings this down from the Rashba and the Rat. Now, the Mishnah Berurah says something that's very negeya to us, halacha l'maisa nowadays. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Va'oisan hakiroi she'ein lehen toich v'cholol. There was a type of kira that didn't have two options. It didn't have an option to put it inside or to put it on top. Elahein pshutois. They were flat. V'toichan v'gaban echad. There's no toich and no gav. What is this? It seems to me that what this means is Let's say the kira that you had is a kira that's very low. It's very flat. There's no room down in the bottom to put a pot. It's a low structure. Maybe you lift it up, you put down your hot coals, you put it back down, so you have this low structure that's sitting over hot coals. There's no place to put a pot inside. You only cook on the top. So there is no toicha and gaba. There's only a gaba. There's no toicha. So then what? Says the Mishnah Berurah, mutter lahachzer lehen, you could do chazara on top, de ein alein shem toich, because there is no toich. V'im yesh eish bekira ayin sibin shin yud ches sif tes vav. If there's actual fire in the bottom, we'll see that in shin yud ches. Now I said that this is very negated to us nowadays. It is. You know why? Because you'll ask yourself, how about doing chazara into an oven? Now I don't want to get too deep into this because I don't want to start now discussing all the halachas lamaises about using ovens on Shabbos. But let's make certain assumptions. Let's say you have an oven that you're able to open and close on Shabbos. You've got the Shabbos mode or the GE thing with the OU, whatever it is. But or you have a good old-fashioned oven with a pilot. So let's say you have an oven that you could properly use on Shabbos. You could actually, it's set before Shabbos, and you're not affecting anything by opening and closing the doors. And you did shehiyah. You had Erev Shabbos, you put food in, it stayed in there to warm. You took something out, you want to put it back. Is that called toicha? The Mechaber just said you're allowed to do chazara on top, al gaba, but you're not allowed to do chazara toicha. Does that apply to our ovens nowadays? Is the oven called toicha and the flame on top called gaba? So I discussed this with a Paisik this morning, and he told me no. You know what our ovens are? They're a dual-use appliance. The top is one type of appliance. It's a cooktop. The inside is another type of appliance. It's an oven. And I'll give this to you very simple. How many people have cooktops that are built into their countertops, and then they have a wall oven? They're not one and the same. That's the cooktop, that's the oven. A standard 30-inch range, a slide-in range, is a dual-use appliance. It's a cooktop, and it's also an oven. They're not using the same fire. A kira is using a fire down below, and that's heating up the top surface. That's not what we have. We have a gas flame on top to boil up your chicken soup. We also have inside an oven that has another fire down at the bottom. That's not toicha that the Mechaber says is aser. So if your oven is the type of oven that you're allowed to use on Shabbos, and if it's grufa uketuma, so let's say it's ketuma because the fire is covered, you can't really see the fire, and you covered up the knob that controls the oven, so it's considered ketuma. If it's grufa uketuma, and the food is still hot, and you never let go of the pot, and you never put it down, and you had daitay lachzira, then l'chayra chazara would be mutter inside the oven. That's not what the Mechaber is answering over here when he says toicha. Okay, let's go a little bit weiter. 2 lines from the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch by the Ois Cut Nun test for the Mishnah Berurah. Ubit tanur. Till now we were discussing akira. Now let's remember, tanur, intense heat. Tanur, grufa ketuma doesn't help. Grufa ketuma never helps by a tanur, because by a tanur, we learned earlier, even if you do grufa, even if you sweep out the coals, we're still afraid shemi yachata b'gechalim, because those few embers that are left, you might stoke them up and they'll make significant enough heat that it'll make a difference. Also, a tanur, you might do initial cooking in a tanur, even if it's grufa ketuma, because of the intense heat of a tanur. So says the Mechaber b'tanur, asar lahachzer afilu hu garf v'katum. By a tanur you can't do chazar, even if it's garf v'katum. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut nun tes, b'tanur afilu husak bekashu begivava. This is true even if you didn't use gefes ve'etzim that makes coals. This is true even if you fired up your tanur with kasha givava. Again, because the heat of the tanur is so intense, we're always worried. Says the Mechaber weiter, v'huadin lekupach. If you had a kupach, the kupach was the middle madrega. Remember, the kira is the coolest, the kupach is a little hotter, the tanur is extreme heat. A kupach that's fired up with gefes and eitzim that make coals, even if it's grufa ketuma, you can't do chazar. Says the Mishnah Berurah cotton samachu adin lekupach. Tahaloy lehutra chazar lo lekuliyama ela begrufa. Because the number one requirement for chazara is grufa uktuma. And grufa uktuma only helps by a kira. It doesn't work by a kupach that's fired with gefes and eitzim, and it doesn't work by a tanner even if it's fired with kashu givava. Ubetana v'kupach shehev lam rav, by a tanner and a kupach that are very hot, loy mahani grifa ukidula el b'sif aleph, like we discussed in Sif Aleph. Last piece, bottom line in the Ramah Haggah, and this is key. I mentioned this at the beginning. The dafka shatavshil mavushal kol tzarchai. The number one requirement for Chazara is we have to be dealing with food that's mavushal kol tzarchai. V'oz mutter lahachzirai, and then Chazara could be mutter afilu likira acheres. Says the Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Samach Aleph, dafka shatavshil. Very important. I know it's all the way at the end of the share and it's almost 50 minutes in, but don't lose track of this. Says the Mishnah Berurah Samach Aleph, dafka shatavshil, it must be a mavushal kol tzarchai. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kai Aresha. This goes back on the beginning of Sif Beis. The Amar afilu b'Shabbos mutar lahachzir al gabe kira kishagder roisachas. When the Mechaber is laying out to me when Chazara is mutar. Grufuk tuma, oida resachas, oida biyadai, daitoi lehechzira. Velazeh beer. Now the Ramah is explaining all of this is only the dafke kishu mavushal kol tzarchai, but number one, Aleph Beis, the food must be mavushal kol tzarchai. Avlim loinus bashal kol tzarchai, shaykh acharavoid bishul. If the food is not mavushal kol tzarchai, then putting it on the fire would be an actual act of bishul. It's not mavushal kol tzarchai. You're putting it on the fire on Shabbos, you're doing bishul. Bishul 101, Isser, Daraisa. V'ayin b'ma shenichtav l'kamam b'sibin shin yod chesif dalid b'mishnah berurah sham. I wanted to read it inside, but we don't have time. All the way at the end of Bir Halacha Dibra Maskal V'daita L'achzira, on Amud Aleph over here, he talks about the question of how about, no, not that one, I'm sorry, the next Bir Halacha, Dibra Maskal V'davka Shatavshil. He says, well, what if the food is not mavushal kol tzarchai, but it's mavushal to the extent of yad seledes? So it was heated to the degree of yad seledes, but I'm sorry, to Michael ben Drusai, not yad seledes. What if it was cooked to the extent of Michael ben Drusai, either a third of the way cooked or a half of the way cooked? It's not mavushal kol tzarchai. Is Chazara mutter then? Right? According to many, once it's K'machal ben Drusai, it's not bishul anymore. At the end of the Bir Halacha it says, "Mikamakim kasher lahakol du negeh be'inyan daraisa." We're playing with daraisis over here. He doesn't want to be makel to allow you to do chazara just because it was cooked to the degree of Michael ben Drusai. It has to be mavushal kol tzarchai. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discussing limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shem should send Yeshua's refuahs panasat shedupim tolos in need. We should be zoichet to see the bias kol tzedek b'meherav yameinu. Amen. Be well.